Daniel Mercer had built his company from the ground up. At 52, he could command a boardroom, negotiate six-figure deals, and read a balance sheet like a favorite novel. Yet that morning, standing in his daughter's doorway, he had no idea how to get a 4-year-old to put on her shoes. "Come on, sweetheart. We're going to be late." Mira sat cross-legged on the carpet, her small hands arranging stuffed animals in a perfect circle. She didn't answer. The house was quiet except for the faint hum of the coffee maker and the ticking of his watch, a rhythm that always reminded him how much time he was losing. He checked his phone again. A notification blinked for the presentation he was due to give at 2, but another reminder glowed just above it. First day of school. He exhaled. The school was supposed to be perfect, structured, prestigious, safe. Everything in his life was built on structure. By the time he wrestled Mira into her pink dress and carried her to the car, the morning sun had already started to burn away the fog. His tie was crooked. The briefcase on the passenger seat looked out of place beside a lunchbox shaped like a rabbit. He pulled out of the driveway, whispering a prayer that the GPS wouldn't reroute him again. 40 minutes later, the navigation chimed. "You've arrived." Daniel slowed, frowning at the modest building ahead. The sign by the entrance read Sunflower Community Preschool. He double-checked the address, same street, same number. But the place didn't look like the elite academy he'd toured online. There were hand-painted flowers on the fence and tiny rain boots lined up by the door. He hesitated, engine running. Myra's reflection stared at him from the rearview mirror, teddy bear pressed to her chest, eyes wide, waiting. A young woman stepped out of the building, sunlight catching in her tied-back hair. She waved a calm, steady gesture and came closer with the kind of smile people use when they know how to meet children where they are. "Good morning," she said softly. "You must be new here." Daniel blinked, uncertain. I might be." For a moment, the world held its breath. A wrong turn, a wrong building, and maybe something that wasn't wrong at all. Before we go on, welcome back, dear friends and new viewers alike. If you love stories inspired by real life, about courage, kindness, and the moments that change us forever, please take a second to subscribe and turn on notifications. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. We always love hearing your stories too. Now back to Daniel. As he stood there, torn between the plan he'd built and the door that had just opened, one thought crossed his mind. If a door opens by mistake, do you walk through, or keep chasing the plan that's slipping away? Daniel stepped inside, the scent of crayons and lemon soap settling around him. Sunlight filtered through paper cutouts taped to the glass, scattering quiet color across the polished floor. A corkboard near the entrance held sign-in sheets neatly clipped beneath a small note. "Please sanitize hands before entering classrooms." He signed his name, the CEO's practice signature looking oddly formal on a preschool clipboard. The young woman, Ms. Elise Hart, as she introduced herself, led them through the hallway. Her tone carried calm authority, not the rehearsed politeness of customer service, but the kind that made people lower their shoulders without realizing it. "We like to keep mornings predictable," she said. "Routine makes the little ones feel safe." Daniel nodded, only half listening. His eyes traced the artwork along the wall, crooked hearts, stick families, bright suns drawn by unsteady hands. The images pressed something deep in his chest he didn't know how to name. 8 months had passed since Myra's mother's funeral. The grief counselor had told him that children process loss differently, that silence can be their way of holding on. He'd written it down in his notes like a business strategy: give her time. Stay consistent. But consistency was hard to measure when the house stayed too quiet, when every sound echoed against absence. At work, Daniel was methodical, decisive, untouchable. He led a software company with clients across 3 continents, and employees described him as the man who never missed a deadline. But at home, he missed everything that mattered. Lunch boxes left on counters, calls from daycare, the bedtime stories his wife used to read without glancing at the clock. When a colleague mentioned Meadowbrook Academy, an elite preschool known for structure and advanced programs, Daniel seized the opportunity. The waiting list was 2 years long, but influence and reputation opened doors. If discipline could rebuild stability, he would find it there. Or so he believed. Now, standing in Sunflower Community Preschool, he saw nothing that resembled the sleek brochure he'd bookmarked. There were no marble floors, no uniformed staff, no promise of early reading programs. Just soft rugs, rounded corners on every piece of furniture, and the gentle hum of a place designed for comfort rather than competition. Mira clung to his pant leg, eyes darting from one colorful corner to the next. Ms. Hart crouched to her level, her voice barely above a whisper. "Would you like to see our classroom rabbit, Pepper?" Mira hesitated. She didn't speak, hadn't for weeks except in murmured fragments Daniel could barely hear. But when Ms. Hart mentioned the rabbit, a small flicker crossed the child's face, not a smile, but something alive. Ms. Hart looked up at Daniel. "You can stay for a few minutes if you'd like. Sometimes new places feel less scary when parents stay." Daniel checked his watch out of habit, then stopped himself. The second hand moved steadily, indifferent to deadlines. 5 minutes, he said quietly. Inside the classroom, morning light spilled across low tables where small hands were already busy with blocks and finger paint. The walls were lined with shelves labeled in tidy handwriting, puzzles, storybooks, art supplies. Near the corner, a large cage held a brown and white rabbit nibbling on lettuce. "That's Pepper," Ms. Hart said. "He thinks he runs the place." For the first time that day, Mira stepped forward on her own. She stood close to the cage, watching as the rabbit's whiskers twitched. Her teddy bear dangled forgotten at her side. Daniel stayed back, afraid to move, afraid the smallest sound might break the moment. He didn't understand how something so ordinary, a rabbit eating lettuce, could draw his daughter out more than all the specialists he'd called in months. Ms. Hart didn't comment on Myra's silence. She simply matched the child's pace, her movements deliberate, patient. "You can pet him through the bars if you'd like. He's gentle." Mira reached out a tentative hand. The rabbit leaned forward, curious. A breath later, her fingers brushed soft fur. It lasted 3 seconds, 3 impossible seconds, and Daniel felt something inside him shift. Ms. Hart smiled without looking up. "She's curious," she said. "That's a very good sign." Daniel nodded, words caught somewhere between relief and disbelief. He realized he had walked into the wrong building, and perhaps into the one place that might quietly rebuild the world he'd been trying so hard to fix. From the moment they stepped deeper into the classroom, something about the air felt different. It wasn't the hum of learning Daniel expected from an elite academy. It was quieter, steadier, as though the room itself understood how to breathe slower. Ms. Hart knelt beside Mira again, careful not to intrude on the small space between the child and the cage. "Would it be all right if I showed you how to feed Pepper?" she asked softly. She didn't reach for the rabbit right away. Instead, she waited for a sign, one tiny nod from Myra's chin, barely there but enough. Ms. Hart guided her hand, her voice calm and low. "See his whiskers? They tickle when he eats. Keep your fingers flat so he doesn't mistake them for food." The words were both instruction and reassurance. Pepper's nose twitched, brushing Myra's palm. The little girl's breath caught, but she didn't pull back. Her teddy bear hung loose in her other arm, forgotten for a fleeting second. Daniel watched in silence. He wasn't sure what amazed him more, the teacher's composure or his daughter's quiet courage. At Meadowbrook, everything was designed to impress: digital boards, advanced reading labs, ambitious schedules. Here, there were no smart screens or branded uniforms, just shelves stacked with storybooks and jars of colored pencils sharpened to imperfect points. A few children drifted over, curious but respectful. Ms. Hart gave them a small wave to stay back, maintaining Myra's fragile sense of safety. "Let's give her some space, friends," she said. "Pepper's meeting someone new today." The tone was gentle but firm, the kind of authority that didn't need to raise its voice. Daniel noticed how she balanced boundaries with warmth. Every movement she made seemed intentional, slow, visible, predictable. It wasn't about control, it was about trust. Mira mirrored her posture without realizing it, crouching just slightly as she fed another leaf of lettuce through the bars. When Ms. Hart finally stood, she turned to Daniel with that same calm professionalism. "She's curious," she said. "Curiosity is the first bridge back from fear." Daniel nodded, unsure what to say. His instinct was to offer gratitude, but the word felt too small. He glanced around again, absorbing details he'd overlooked: the laminated charts showing morning routines, the cubbies labeled with first names, the nap mats rolled neatly in one corner. Everything here seemed designed to make children feel they belonged. Ms. Hart's attention shifted to Mira, who had begun tracing patterns on the floor with her shoe. "Would you like to sit with Pepper while I get his breakfast ready?" she asked. Mira gave a single solemn nod. Daniel exhaled quietly. It had taken therapists months to earn that same simple gesture at home. While Ms. Hart prepared a small bowl of greens, she spoke without looking directly at him. "You mentioned this wasn't the school you planned for?" He hesitated, then admitted, "No. We were supposed to be at Meadowbrook. I must have entered the wrong address." Ms. Hart smiled, faint but knowing. It happens. Sometimes the wrong turns bring us to what we need most. Her words lingered. He wanted to dismiss them as coincidence, but something about the way she said it carried weight. She knelt beside Mira once more, this time holding a small carrot. Pepper likes when we give him one treat before his nap, she explained, showing Mira how to place it near the bars and step back. Mira obeyed, silent but attentive, watching until the rabbit's nose brushed the food. Then, for the first time in months, Daniel saw the edges of a smile ghost across his daughter's lips. He swallowed hard, steadying himself. This was not the miracle of a prestigious program or the result of any strategy. It was simply kindness, practiced, patient, and real. Ms. Hart turned to him, professionalism anchoring her tone. Mr. Mercer, children who've experienced loss often need permission to stay quiet before they can find words again. Our role isn't to rush them, it's to hold space until they're ready. Daniel studied her face. There was no pity there, just understanding built on experience. You've worked with children like her before? I've worked with children, she corrected gently. Each one teaches me something new. Mira is no different. She's just carrying something heavy for someone so small. The conversation was interrupted by a soft chime. A digital clock on the wall displayed the time, 10:15. Other children began tidying their tables, sliding books into bins, following the rhythm of practice transition. Ms. Hart looked back at him. We do have an opening, she said, but there's no pressure today. You can let her stay for a bit, see how she feels. Daniel hesitated. I don't want to disrupt your class. You're not, she replied simply. Observation can be the start of belonging. For the next 20 minutes, he sat on a small chair near the doorway, watching as Mira remained by the cage. She didn't speak, but her eyes followed Pepper's every move, the twitch of an ear, the soft thump of paws against straw. Occasionally, she glanced toward Miss Hart, who continued her lesson with the other children, but always kept Mira within her line of sight. No grand lesson plans. No advanced tests. Just a teacher whose quiet awareness filled the space like sunlight. When the children gathered for a short story, Ms. Hart announced, We're reading about a rabbit who thought he was too small to help. The class giggled. Mira didn't join in, but she turned her chair slightly toward the group. It was a movement so subtle that only Daniel noticed, but it was movement. It was engagement. He felt a lump rise in his throat, the kind that comes when you realize something important before you can name it. For the first time, he wondered if the best school wasn't the one with prestige, but the one that understood how to meet his daughter where she was. Ms. Hart caught his glance and gave a small nod, as if she already knew what he was thinking. Outside, the late morning light shifted against the window pane, scattering warmth across the floor. And in that quiet moment, the thought came uninvited yet undeniable. If healing looks ordinary instead of exceptional, would you recognize it? The boardroom could wait. For once in his life, Daniel Mercer didn't let the clock dictate his decisions. He stepped outside the classroom, phone in hand, and called his assistant. His voice was quiet, steady. Reschedule the pitch, he said. Yes, the investors can wait until tomorrow. Something more important came up. It was the first time he'd ever used those words and meant them. When he returned, the classroom had shifted into what Ms. Hart called circle time. The children sat in a loose ring on the rug, their teacher reading from a storybook about clouds and color. Mira sat a few feet away, not part of the circle but close enough to hear every word. Beside her sat Pepper's small travel crate, the quiet hum of fur and breath grounding her in a world that still felt too big. Ms. Hart didn't call on her or draw attention. She simply spoke the story aloud as though Mira had been there all along. Some clouds look heavy, she said, her tone gentle. But even heavy clouds move when the wind is kind. The words floated through the air, simple enough for children, heavy enough for Daniel to feel them in his chest. He settled into a small chair near the wall, awkwardly folded knees reminding him he didn't belong in furniture made for 4-year-olds. Yet the scene unfolding in front of him pulled him in. There was no performance here, no competition. Each child participated in their own way. One hummed softly, another clapped out of rhythm, and no one corrected them. It was chaos, but a peaceful kind. When the story ended, Ms. Hart announced snack time. The children moved to the low tables, already familiar with the routine. Daniel watched as Ms. Hart guided Mira to an empty seat at the end. You don't have to talk, she said kindly. Just sit with us. She placed a small cup of milk and a napkin with crackers in front of her, nothing fancy, just something ordinary enough to feel safe. Ms. Hart began a conversation with the group, her tone light but deliberate. If you could be any animal today, what would you be? She asked. Hands shot up, voices overlapping, lion, butterfly, dolphin. Then she looked at Mira and added, "You can just show me with your hands if you like." Mira paused, then raised 2 fingers like rabbit ears. Daniel's breath caught. It was a small thing, but it carried the weight of months. Ms. Hart smiled, as though it was the most natural answer in the world. "A rabbit, of course," she said. "I think Pepper would like that." She moved on without making it a spectacle. That subtle restraint struck Daniel, the kind of sensitivity that could only come from someone who truly understood children. As snack ended, Ms. Hart directed the class toward free choice time. The visual schedule on the wall flipped from snack to create. Children scattered to stations, building blocks, painting, puzzles. Mira stayed seated, quietly folding her napkin. Ms. Hart approached, crouching again to her level. "Would you like to draw Pepper today?" Mira looked at her blankly at first, then nodded once. Ms. Hart placed a blank sheet and a box of crayons on the table and moved away, letting her work without the pressure of eyes watching. Minutes passed. The hum of conversation filled the room. A teacher's aide helped 2 children clean a spill. Someone giggled in the reading corner. Daniel sat still, uncertain whether to hope or hold back. Then he saw it, Myra's hand moving with slow, careful lines across the page. A round shape, 2 ears, small dots for eyes. When she finished, she stared at it for a long time. Then, clutching the drawing with both hands, she stood and walked to Ms. Hart's desk. She didn't speak. She simply held it out. Ms. Hart received it with both hands, as if it were fragile. "You drew Pepper?" she asked, tone steady, neither surprised nor exaggerated. Mira nodded once, eyes wide. "It's wonderful," Ms. Hart said. "Would it be okay if I hang it with the others?" Mira hesitated, then whispered something too soft to hear. Ms. Hart leaned closer. "What did you say?" "Next to the window," Mira repeated, voice barely above a breath. Daniel felt a sting behind his eyes. It wasn't just that his daughter had spoken, it was how naturally Ms. Hart had received it. No celebration, no alarm, just acceptance. Ms. Hart taped the drawing near the window, adjusting it so the morning light shone through the paper. "Perfect spot," she said. "Now everyone can see Pepper keeping watch." The rest of the class went on as usual. Daniel watched from the corner as Mira wandered to the art shelf, picked up another blank page, and sat quietly sketching shapes. The room's rhythm held steady, music low, voices soft, children engaged. Every part of the environment was intentional. The feelings chart on the wall, the color-coded bins, the calm-down corner with a beanbag and soft toy basket. Daniel realized it wasn't a miracle unfolding, it was a method. Predictability, permission, patience. Things no brochure had promised, but which somehow made all the difference. Ms. Hart glanced toward him and spoke quietly. "Children rebuild safety through repetition. Every time she chooses to engage, that's a brick in the foundation." He nodded, absorbing every word. "And if she stops choosing?" "Then we wait," she said. "Healing isn't a race. It's practice." The clock on the wall ticked past noon. He was supposed to be halfway across the city presenting a quarterly forecast, but for once, forecasts didn't matter. What mattered sat at the end of the table, coloring another page with quiet focus. When the children gathered again for afternoon reflection, Ms. Hart pointed to the feelings board. Each child placed a magnet under a face that matched their mood: happy, tired, calm, worried. Mira watched carefully, then walked over and chose one. She placed her magnet under calm. It wasn't joy yet, but it was peace. Daniel exhaled deeply, a sound that felt like letting go of months of tension. He finally understood. Progress didn't always look like triumph. Sometimes it looked like quiet, like crayons and sunlight and the sound of children breathing in unison. And as the day drew to a close, he realized the truth he'd been avoiding all morning. He hadn't rescued Mira by finding the perfect school. She had begun rescuing herself the moment he stopped trying to fix her. Outside, the clouds began to thin, and light streamed through the windows where a paper rabbit watched over the room. Over the next several days, the rhythm of Daniel Mercer's life changed. Not dramatically, just enough for the noise of urgency to quiet. Each morning began with the same scene. The drive to Sunflower Preschool, Myra's teddy tucked under her arm, the hum of the radio filling the silence they both used to fear. But something subtle had shifted. The silence wasn't empty anymore, it was expectant. At first, Mira would only stand by the classroom doorway while Ms. Hart greeted the children. She never joined circle time, never sang. Yet she didn't hide behind Daniel's leg anymore. She'd lingered just long enough to watch Ms. Hart's hands as she signed "Good morning" to the class, a small gesture repeated every day that built trust wordlessly. By midweek, Daniel noticed how easily Ms. Hart turned structure into comfort. Each activity began and ended with a clear cue, a chime, a picture card, a countdown from 5. The schedule never changed. It was simple, visible, reliable, something Mira could predict even before she understood the routine. That predictability was doing what therapy sessions hadn't, teaching her that the world could be safe again. At pickup, Ms. Hart gave Daniel short updates, always factual, never dramatic. "She sat near the story circle today," she said one afternoon. "Didn't speak, but she hummed with the others." Another day, "She nodded when I asked if Pepper should have lettuce or carrot. She chose lettuce." Every detail was small, but Daniel learned to treat them like milestones. The CEO in him, once obsessed with measurable growth, found himself taking pride in things that didn't fit on a spreadsheet. Eye contact, a nod, a quiet hum. That Friday, he arrived early. Through the window, he saw Mira sitting cross-legged near Pepper's crate, while Ms. Hart led a song about animals. When she reached the verse about rabbits, Daniel saw his daughter's lips move ever so slightly. Not full words, just a sound. But when the song ended, Mira whispered something into her teacher's ear. Ms. Hart's face softened, and she gave a small nod. "That's self-regulation," Ms. Hart replied. "It's the mind's way of saying, I'm okay here." When the decorations were done, Ms. Hart thanked him, her tone simple and professional. "The class will love it," she said. "Predictable change is important, new visuals, same warmth." Daniel checked his phone out of habit, then turned the screen face down. "I could use some predictable change myself," he admitted. The week unfolded with growing steadiness. Every drop-off was smoother. Every pickup carried a story worth holding on to. One afternoon, Ms. Hart greeted Daniel with a small smile. "Mira asked a question today," she said. He froze. "She spoke?" "She did," Ms. Hart confirmed. "She asked if Pepper likes carrots or lettuce better." Not whispered, spoken. Daniel blinked. It wasn't the content that mattered. It was the fact that she'd initiated it. "What did you say?" "I asked her to tell me what she thought," Ms. Hart said. "She chose lettuce. She's learning that communication has power when it feels like choice, not expectation." Daniel stood there, stunned by the simplicity of it. For months he'd tried to guide, push, correct. Yet progress had come the moment control stepped aside. At home, he applied the same strategy. During bedtime, he used first-then statements, another tool Ms. Hart had modeled. "First we brushed teeth, then we read Pepper's story." Clear, predictable, safe. Mira followed the pattern willingly, her resistance softening with each passing night. He also began narrating his own calm during stressful moments, something Ms. Hart called modeling emotional literacy. When the microwave beeped too loudly or the power flickered during a storm, Daniel would say aloud, "That startled me, but I'm okay now." Mira started echoing the phrasing in her own small voice. One evening, while cleaning up after dinner, Daniel caught himself analyzing the pattern like a business strategy. It wasn't control, it was connection. Every consistent cue, every gentle boundary, every pause before correction, it all formed a structure strong enough for a child to trust again. The next morning, he arrived early at Sunflower. Ms. Hart was already setting up stations, paint trays, building blocks, sensory bins. She greeted him without stopping her motion. "The key is rhythm," she said, almost to herself. "Children trust what repeats." Daniel nodded, watching the calm efficiency of her movements. "It's not so different from leadership," he admitted. "Consistency breeds stability. I just never realized it applies to hearts as much as it does to teams." She smiled. "Exactly. Leadership isn't about managing emotions, it's about modeling them." When Mira entered the classroom that day, she didn't hesitate. She hung her coat, placed her teddy on the cubby shelf, and went straight to Pepper's cage. Ms. Hart crouched beside her. "Good morning, Mira. How's our little friend today?" Mira looked up, thoughtful. "He's hungry," she said quietly. It was only 2 words, but Daniel felt something tighten in his chest, a mix of awe and gratitude. Ms. Hart didn't overreact. She simply nodded, handing Mira a piece of lettuce. "Then let's feed him." Daniel stood there, absorbing the moment. His daughter's healing was happening not through miracles or grand gestures, but through consistent, deliberate care from 2 adults who had learned how to listen. As he left for work, he caught a glimpse of the window where the winter snowflakes swayed gently above the drawings. In one of them, Pepper sat beside a smaller rabbit, hand-drawn, a child's version of family. For the first time, Daniel saw the picture not as art, but as evidence, a record of progress measurable only by heart. And as he stepped outside into the crisp morning air, one thought stayed with him. Leadership and love weren't separate skills after all. They were the same language, spoken through patience. The next challenge came quietly, no warning, no major crisis. Just rain. Heavy, unrelenting rain that canceled outdoor play and shifted the preschool's routine. For most children, it meant a day of indoor games and art. But for Mira, it was a sudden disruption to the predictability she'd learned to rely on. When Daniel dropped her off that morning, he sensed the tension before they even reached the classroom. The cheerful chalk drawings outside had been washed away. The usual line of children waiting to hang their coats was replaced by a cluster of parents exchanging quick goodbyes under dripping umbrellas. Mira clutched his hand tighter, her body stiff, silent. Inside, Ms. Hart was already adapting. A substitute aide, Ms. Bailey, was helping rearrange tables for indoor activities. The hum of chatter was louder than usual. Daniel noticed how Myra's shoulders rose at every sound. Change, even harmless change, felt like uncertainty to her. Ms. Hart spotted them immediately. "Good morning, Mira," she said, her voice calm and steady, unbothered by the chaos. "We're doing something a little different today. Our picnic moved indoors. Would you like to help me choose where to put Pepper's crate?" Mira didn't answer. Her fingers tightened around Daniel's sleeve. Ms. Hart didn't push. She simply crouched to Myra's height and held out 2 picture cards, one showing the reading corner, another the art table. "You can pick," she said. "Either one is fine. Pepper just needs a dry spot." Daniel watched, holding his breath. After a long moment, Mira tapped the card with the art table. Ms. Hart smiled. "Good choice. Let's set it there together." The tension in the air eased slightly as Mira followed her, small steps deliberate, cautious. She stayed quiet, but her eyes stayed on Pepper as Ms. Hart placed the crate on a folded towel. Routine within change. It was subtle but powerful. When Daniel turned to leave, Myra's grip faltered for a second, then tightened again. Her eyes flicked toward the window, toward the streaks of rain. "It's just rain," he said softly. "It'll stop soon." She didn't look convinced. Ms. Hart gave him a reassuring nod. "We've got this," she said. "You can go. She'll find her footing." But she didn't, not right away. By mid-morning, the substitute aide introduced a new game, clapping her hands and announcing it with loud enthusiasm. The sudden burst of noise froze Mira mid-step. She backed into a corner, clutching her teddy bear to her chest. Her breathing quickened. Ms. Hart moved instantly but calmly. "Thank you, Ms. Bailey," she said quietly. "Let's turn the volume down a little." She knelt near Mira without invading her space. "You're safe," she said softly. "Same classroom, same Pepper. Just rain outside, that's all." She pointed to the visual schedule still hanging on the board. Nothing had changed except one card. Outdoor play replaced by indoor picnic. "See," she said. "Different picture, same day." Mira didn't respond, but she was listening. Ms. Hart reached for the same strategy that had worked before, choice. She laid 2 cards on the floor, draw with crayons or sit by Pepper. "You choose," she said. "No rush." A full minute passed. Then, with trembling fingers, Mira touched the card with Pepper's picture. Ms. Hart nodded. "All right, let's go check on him." That quiet redirection broke the paralysis. Slowly, Mira followed her across the room, eyes on the rabbit's crate. She didn't speak, but when Pepper rustled inside, she leaned closer and whispered, "He doesn't like thunder." It was the first sound she'd made in hours. Ms. Hart didn't celebrate, didn't interrupt. "Maybe not," she said. "But he's brave, and so are you." The rest of the class adjusted around them, block towers rising in one corner, crayons rolling across tables, children laughing in bursts. Mira stayed near the crate, tracing circles on the towel, her breathing steadying. When Daniel arrived at noon, Ms. Hart met him at the door. "Rough start," she admitted. "But she recovered. That's progress." Daniel frowned. "Recovered how?" "She froze, but she came back," Ms. Hart explained. "That's the work, learning that safety isn't about never feeling afraid. It's about knowing the feeling doesn't last forever." Later that evening, Daniel replayed the scene in his mind. He imagined the noise, the change, the moment of stillness before Mira moved again. At Meadowbrook, a setback like that might have been labeled regression, proof that she wasn't keeping pace. But here, it was part of the process, not a failure. At home, Daniel tried something new. During dinner, when the thunder rolled outside again, Mira flinched. He took a slow breath, then narrated his calm the way Ms. Hart had modeled. "That noise startled me," he said, steady and casual. "But we're safe inside." Mira looked up. After a moment, she whispered, "Safe." It wasn't loud, but it was deliberate. The next day, the sun returned. The playground reopened, the substitute was gone, and Mira walked into class without hesitation. She went straight to Pepper's cage, checked his water, then looked at a classmate building with blocks. For the first time, she made eye contact and didn't look away. From the hallway, Daniel watched through the glass. Ms. Hart caught his gaze and gave a subtle nod, as if to say, "This is what growth looks like." Not a straight climb, but a rhythm, forward, pause, return. Later, as Daniel drove to work, he thought about the precision he demanded from his business. Clear metrics, predictable outcomes, no wasted motion. Parenting, he realized, followed a different equation. Progress wasn't a line drawn upward. It was a circle, a cycle of safety tested and rebuilt. The next time a storm came, he didn't brace for collapse. He turned off the TV, dimmed the lights, and let Mira sit near the window, listening to the rain. She didn't cling this time. She just whispered, "Pepper would be okay." Daniel smiled. "So are we." And in that quiet, he finally understood. Strength wasn't the absence of fear. It was the ability to return after being shaken. That night, as he tucked Mira into bed, her stuffed rabbit resting by her pillow, the thought echoed in his mind like a quiet revelation. Is progress the straight line we demand, or the circle we learn to trust? It happened so quietly that Daniel almost missed it. That afternoon, when the classroom door opened and Mira came running toward him, she said it, clear, certain, effortless. "Daddy, Pepper's sleeping." 4 words. Ordinary to anyone else. Extraordinary to him. For a second, Daniel just stared, unsure if he'd imagined it. But Ms. Hart's soft smile confirmed what he'd heard. "She told me all about his new blanket," she said, gesturing toward the rabbit's cage inside. "Apparently, he likes blue." That night, the change followed them home. During their bedtime routine, Mira no longer waited for prompts. She picked the book herself, The Little Cloud That Tried Again, and climbed into bed with her teddy tucked under one arm. As Daniel began to read, she interrupted softly. "Pepper would like this story." He laughed, quiet and warm. Maybe he would. Then came something new, something Miss Hart had encouraged, the rose and bud ritual. "What was your rose today?" he asked. "Something good that happened." Mira thought for a moment. "Pepper's blanket," she whispered. "And your bud?" She frowned thoughtfully. "Tomorrow." Daniel nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. Hope. Anticipation. The next small step forward. At work the next morning, Daniel noticed how the changes at home had reshaped him professionally. A tense meeting that once would have ended in raised voices now unfolded differently. When an employee fumbled a presentation, Daniel caught himself applying the same calm Ms. Hart modeled daily. Steady tone, specific praise, simple correction. "Let's try that again," he said, instead of sighing or lecturing. The room's tension dissolved instantly. Later, during lunch, his assistant asked, "You've been different lately." Quieter. "Everything all right?" Daniel smiled faintly. "Better than all right. Just learning new management techniques from a 4-year-old and a preschool teacher." That evening, when he arrived at Sunflower for pickup, Ms. Hart met him with her usual clipboard in hand. She wasn't one for exaggeration. Every word came measured, professional. "I've started documenting her progress formally," she said, flipping to a chart. Dates, brief notes, clear observations. Her verbal engagement increased by 30% this week. She initiated communication 3 separate times. Daniel studied the page, astonished by the precision. Each line was proof, not of a miracle, but of methodical, repeatable growth. "You track everything?" he asked. Ms. Hart nodded. "Children thrive when progress is seen as data and emotion. This helps us adjust interventions without pressure." He looked at the chart again. A column labeled confidence indicators listed phrases like eye contact during peer play and voluntary speech in group setting. Under comments, she'd written in neat handwriting, "Responds best to gentle humor." "Associates safety with familiar objects." He folded the paper carefully, as if it were something fragile. "Thank you for keeping such detailed notes," he said. Ms. Hart shook her head. "Thank her," she replied, echoing what she'd said weeks before. "She's showing us what consistency can do." On the drive home, Daniel couldn't stop replaying that moment at pickup. The sound of Myra's voice, casual but confident. He thought of all the nights he'd sat awake wondering if she would ever speak freely again. And now, She was narrating her world one small word at a time. For months, mornings had meant rushing, coaxing, checking, worrying. But today, she was leading the rhythm. She even remembered her lunchbox, then turned toward him and said, "Ready, Daddy?" He smiled, setting his phone face down on the table. For once, there were no emails to glance at, no alerts to chase. Just her voice, clear and steady, calling him into the moment. The drive to Sunflower Preschool was quiet in the best way. No tension, no silence heavy with fear. Just a shared calm between them. The same road that had once felt foreign now unfolded like home. When they reached the familiar building, Mira hopped out first. She adjusted the strap of her backpack, brushed a bit of lint from her sleeve, and reached for his hand, not out of need but habit. At the door, Ms. Hart greeted them with her usual warmth. "Good morning, Mira." "Good morning, Mr. Mercer." "Morning," Daniel replied. "Looks like someone's excited today." Mira nodded proudly, handing over her drawing. "It's for the spring wall," she said. Ms. Hart smiled. "Then it's going right next to Pepper's snow picture. Perfect symmetry." Daniel crouched down to her level. "Same routine?" he asked. She grinned, repeating their goodbye ritual exactly as practiced. One hug, one high five, one wave. Then, for the first time, she looked back from the doorway and said clearly, "See you later, Dad." Those 4 words hit harder than any speech he'd ever given. He stood there for a moment after she disappeared into the classroom, the door closing softly behind her. The hum of morning traffic returned, faint and distant. But Daniel didn't move. He didn't need to. It struck him then. The real map had never been about direction, prestige, or even fixing things. It was about creating a space safe enough for her to be sad when she needed to be, and brave when she was ready. A place where joy didn't erase grief, it simply lived beside it. Through the window, he could see Pepper's cage by the wall. The rabbit was munching on greens, content as ever, while the winter light shifted across the children's artwork. Myra's new picture, bright, hopeful, swayed gently in the warmth. Daniel took a slow breath, the kind that settles in the chest rather than escapes it. The chapter wasn't over. It was simply steady now. Ordinary, grounded, real. He finally picked up his phone, not to check messages, but to take one quiet picture through the glass. A keepsake of normalcy. Then he whispered, half to himself, half to the universe, "We're okay." And for the first time in a long while, he truly believed it. Clapperboard before you go. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. We post new, true-to-life stories every day, each one a reminder that healing often begins in the quiet moments. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Your words help keep these stories alive.